Good afternoon, this is Beale from CEB. It's a pleasure to be running another webinar with the IRM, and today we're speaking about risk in the boardroom. Also, I'm delighted to welcome two panelists. You can see their names on the front page here. Carolyn, who's Chief Audit Executive at the University of Virginia, and Louis Cooper, who's Chief Executive of NEDA. I'll be introducing them in a little bit more detail momentarily. I've run a couple of webinars with the IRM this year and a couple last year, so some of you on the call may recognise my voice, may know my name, but for those of you who don't, Beale, as you can see on the screen here, I'm a Principal Executive Advisor with CEB based here in London, and I support about 300 audit and risk clients that we have in the EMEA region. So very warm welcome from me, from CEB, to this afternoon's webinar, jointly running with the Institute of Risk Management. Topic we've been asked to speak about is what should and do boards hear from their ERM teams. What does generate the most interest and best conversations in the room? How best to report with impact to boards in your organisation. So I'm going to be leading the discussion during this afternoon. We've got 60 minutes for this webinar, and I'll be bringing both Carolyn and Louis into the conversation at several times during this afternoon's conversation, during this afternoon's webinar, to get their views. And I know towards the end we will have a polling question or two for you and get your feedback on this afternoon's session. So let me introduce our panelists. First one up, Carolyn, who is Chief Audit Executive, as I mentioned, University of Virginia. She's been there over a year, not quite a year and a half yet. You can see on her resume here on the screen she joined in April 2015. Before that, a number of years running the audit function at 7-Eleven. I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with 7-Eleven, a massive global retailer. And before that, other retail and internal audit experience, and also external audit experience. Carolyn's very well works very well with the IIA, as you can see towards the bottom, and also particularly interesting for us today is a board member for ACL. So she'll be speaking both as a practitioner and with external audit, but also internal audit experience, but also as a board member. So welcome, Carolyn, and thank you for dialing in from the US to join us today. And our second panelist, some of you may well know him, Louis Cooper, Chief Executive of the NEDA, and also an approved trainer for IRM. And in fact, Louis is running a one-day training session on a very similar topic to this, and we'll have details for you at the end of this afternoon's session on that. As you can see, coming from an external audit background, but also plenty of risk and assurance and governance experience with Big Four, and also as a partner with Crowe Clark Whitehill, and now is a consultant with different companies. You can see there 3 risk assurance and strategy consultants, including the software firm Magic Galileo. So again, a warm welcome to Louis, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. So the roadmap for this afternoon, for the session, let me just explain what we're going to be talking about. Really 3 areas. I'm going to focus first on a bit of regulatory background, very briefly giving you some context as to what boards are formally expected to do in terms of risk management, what they are expected to understand and to review, provide oversight and challenge to management on. So I'm going to be focusing principally on the requirements for UK listed companies, but bringing both Louis and Carolyn in to give us a view from their different perspectives on those oversight responsibilities. Secondly, what do boards see? What gets reported to boards? What are the topics that regularly come through to boards? And also, how can ERM leaders, how can chief risk officers report with impact to their boards? What sort of information, what sort of reporting formats and templates are most impactful? And then a very topical subject, Brexit, particularly for UK companies, but not just UK companies. Clearly it's having a global impact, as evidenced by the G20 meeting that we've probably all seen news of over the last couple of days. So certainly from our experience, every chief risk officer and ERM leader that we're working with at the moment is telling us their board is requiring an update on Brexit at their Q3 board meeting, and so we wanted to focus just briefly on that towards the end and before we close this afternoon's session. So let's look first a couple of pages looking at the requirements, the formal requirements for UK listed companies. I think they are similar to what other European and other listed companies are expected to do. So it gives us a good grounding for what is the formal requirements that boards are expected to understand and to respond to. So first of all, sorry, apologies for that, pressed the wrong button. So this is a summary of the responsibilities from the fairly recently published FRC guidance on board responsibilities for risk management and internal control. We've summarized them here, and really there's 6 areas you can see laid out on this page. So the first, number 1, is around the design and implementation of the risk management and internal control system, ensuring the board ensuring that they are satisfied that it's well designed and adequately implemented for the risks that they're facing their organization. Secondly, to understand the nature and extent of the principal risks that their organisation that they are sitting on the board of are facing, and the risks that that organisation are willing to take to achieve their strategic objectives. Thirdly, that there's an appropriate culture and reward system embedded throughout the organisation. Fourthly, agreeing how those principal risks should be managed or mitigated to reduce the likelihood of their incidence or the impact should a risk actually crystallise. Monitoring and reviewing, the 5th point there, that the risk management and control systems. So that's understanding what those systems are, receiving information maybe from ERM, internal audit, or from management, and satisfying themselves that those control systems are functioning effectively and where necessary improvements are being made. And then finally, the final point is that appropriate communication is made externally to stakeholders, to the market, etc., on risk management and internal control. So 6 pretty broad principle-based responsibilities that every board has to meet. There are some additional requirements, and I just lay them out on this next page. These are coming either from the Companies Act. You can see the first point quite similarly, requiring a reporting on those principal risks, reporting on whether the directors have a reasonable expectation that the company will continue. So this is around the viability statement that companies now have to make for their organisations. This is over and above the next point, which is the going concern, which is focused on the accounting side. So the viability statement is normally looking over a 2 to 5 year period that the business will continue to operate over that period. And then finally, the financial reporting requirements, which include reporting on risk management and internal control systems, and that's a UK listing requirement you can see there. So let me just pause here, and Carolyn, if I could bring you in first. I know you're speaking from the US, slightly different regulatory and legal requirements for companies listed over there, but from your perspective, working in international companies and the viewpoint you have, do you think those are a reasonable set of requirements being placed upon boards, or is there anything missing? And based on those requirements, what do you see boards struggling with most, either to understand or to challenge management about?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think these are natural conversations boards need to have and responsibilities they need to feel ownership for as a board related to risk management and control. But the words on the page make it sound so one-sided, as if these are things that a board could do almost in a vacuum in conversations with itself. So for me, the most challenging elements of managing internal control and risk at the board level would relate to your 2nd and 6th points. So determining the nature and extent of the risks faced. I mean, how do you do that? How do you ensure that you get the right information, that it hasn't been filtered? Because as we know, a board relies on the management team for its information, for a lot of its perspectives. So how does the board cultivate an objective perspective? That's a real challenge to do, given the role of the board. This is not anyone's full-time job as a board member. So how do you get that alternative point of view? And then around communication, as an auditor, I find that the root of most problems or control deficiencies are related to poor communication. So again, if you're sitting at a board level and you meet with your management team 4 to 6 times a year, not always in person, how do you make sure that that communication is happening that can give you the information you would need to execute these responsibilities?
Okay, great, thank you. And Louis, can I turn to you with the same questions? Do you think these are a reasonable set of requirements, or is there anything missing? And which of those requirements do you see boards finding most difficult to understand or to challenge management upon?
I picked up on the same points actually as Carolyn, particularly on the 2nd bullet point. in respect to the principal risk. So I actually looked at the second part of the sentence first and thinking about achieving strategic objectives, because I think the board's view on life is to focus on making sure that you're achieving those objectives. And if risk is wrapped around that process, then it will appear on the board agenda, and the tone is really then set from the board's perspective. I think the actual sort of words and the promotion of what's required is fairly standard. But I think what the guidelines tried to do, where they changed them slightly back in 2014, they did actually put more focus on the board's responsibility and their role, and put more emphasis on what the board should be doing in making sure these things happen. So I think at the end of the day, risk management is good decision making and supporting good decision making, and helping to drive the appropriate behaviours of people, rather than setting up systems to generate information. I think the biggest concern is probably around how you embed risk management in the organisation, rather than creating an initiative that we look at various points in time. And one thing I'm seeing from a lot of work with boards recently is that there's quite a lot of activity at strategic sort of top level. There's a lot of work being done at operational levels, so there's a top-down and a bottom-up approach, but the two don't always meet in the middle. So there's a bit of a gap there that needs to be bridged, and quite a few organisations struggle to do that. And the other two final points, I think reporting can tend to be fairly boilerplate and can present a very rosy picture. When you actually go in to the organisation and have a look at what's going on, there's a disconnect between the report and the actual experience. I was in a FTSE 100 company recently where that was very clear, that there was lots of activity going through the organisation across the world, because they're an international group, but it actually didn't stack up with what they were saying in their report, which came across as very sort of glowing summary of sort of their risk management process. And the final point, I think, is training and education that's required at all levels to keep people up to date with all of this information and how they actually approach it. And one of my clients said recently, our biggest concern is that our board isn't actually trained and updated on some of the things that we do in the organisation. So I think we do need to make sure that the board is fully engaged and understands sort of what's going on further down the organisation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And just to build on that very last point, we couldn't agree more that many boards seem to be lacking in one key area in terms of cyber security. That many boards will have someone who understands accounting and finance. They're obliged to have a director that can have those skills and recent experience. But many do not have anybody that understands information technology, systems, data security, or cyber risks. We're starting to see that change for exactly the reason you were saying, because that whole risk area is so important for many organisations, and we've worked with some recently where they've explicitly recruited their next board member has come either from an executive IT role, so a CIO somewhere, or they've been a CEO or something similar at an IT company. So for one reason or another, they have a lot of detailed IT knowledge, and that really has bolstered the competence of the board, both to understand that key risk, but also to provide oversight and challenge to management around it as well. So thank you both for those comments. Let's move on to the second area. I really want now to focus on four different areas. What should boards be focusing on? What should they be expecting to hear and see from management and the ERM team? What is actually reported to boards, and what questions do boards ask? What are the challenges that boards throw out to the leaders of their ERM functions or to management to make sure they can discharge their oversight responsibilities? And then I want to, at the end of this section, give you a number of examples of best practice reporting templates. And again, I will bring in both Carolyn and Louis and ask them some questions as we go through this section. So first, let me focus on what should boards be focusing upon. We have regularly done research at CB as to what are the most frequent reasons that companies suffer significant loss of shareholder value. And for those of you with excellent eyesight, you can see, you can probably read this here. Strategic risks towards the left-hand side are the most frequent, and we've done this review a number of times since 1998. We've done it 3 different times, and most recently was last year, and before that we did it 2010 as well. And strategic risks continue to dominate the frequency with which companies have suffered at least a 40, if not a 50% loss in shareholder value in a 12-month period. You can see on the left-hand side, declining core product demand is the most frequently occurring. Undiversified risks, so that's single products, single market, single suppliers, that type of thing, causing a very strong concentration of risks. On the other side, you can see on the right-hand side, operational, legal and financial risks do occasionally cause significant loss of shareholder value, but relatively very infrequently. So strategic risks are the most frequent causes of major loss of shareholder value. They do also cause aftershocks. So not only is there a single event which causes a major loss of shareholder value, for strategic risks you can see this continues, there's a continued decline where the company never comes back to more than 90% of its original stock market capitalization. And there might be an aftershock where there's an additional decline from the same sort of source. There might be stagnation where the company doesn't recover quickly or significantly, and indeed you can see 13% go out of business as well as a result of the shock. So you can see on the left-hand side of this, a strategic risk crystallizing or an incident occurring is not only significant by itself, but it causes aftershocks as well. On the other hand, those smaller risks, those operational and financial risks, don't cause such a significant loss, don't occur so frequently, and many companies recover. You can see 56% of companies recover after one of those events, and indeed the aftershocks are less significant, you can see on the right-hand side there. So it's not just the initial event, it's the aftershocks which also cause significant issues for companies. But where do we see audit and risk teams focusing on? This particularly highlights where the audit teams focus on, but the same sort of statistics would come through if we were reporting on risk. On the left-hand side of those numbers, you can see 86% again at the top of the pyramid, representing those strategic risks we saw 2 pages ago, and then operational, legal and financial coming down that pyramid. On the other side, on the right-hand side of the page, it's almost a mirror image. Where do audit and risk teams spend their time? The vast majority is at the bottom of the pyramid, and very little is at the top of the pyramid. So there's a mismatch between where the key risks are occurring that frequently disrupt significantly corporate performance, and those risks which boards should be focused on, and where audit and risk teams are spending their time and therefore providing reports and information to their boards upon those risks. So a bit of a mismatch there we're seeing. So that's the first point I wanted to make. Secondly, I want to switch to what do boards actually get to see? What are in their ERM reports, in their risk reports that get provided to them, and what topics generate the most conversation, the best conversations around boardroom tables? Top of the page, these are the topics that generate the most conversation in board committee meetings. I'm just going to read out just 2 or 3 of them from the left-hand side. The biggest one on the left, prioritized ranking of enterprise risks. So what are our top 10 risks? What are our top 10? What are our principal risks, if you like? So understanding what those key risks are. Second one, moving from left to right, deep dive on a specific risk area. Let's really get to understand as a management team, as a board, understand one of those risks. Let's really drill down into intellectual properties or supply chain or cyber security, whatever it might be. The third one, risk mitigation plans. Having had that deep dive, let's truly understand how well management are confronting that risk, and are we managing it, mitigating it, insuring against it, able to respond to it if it does occur. And then finally, the fourth point I'll highlight, emerging risks. Let's scan the horizon and see what risks are arising, are becoming bigger, becoming more important. So let's look to the future as well as look at the current portfolio of risks. At the bottom, you see what's included in board-level risk reports. The most frequently occurring item is an overview of the ERM program. how we're set up, what our stage of maturity is, what we've done in the last 6 months, what we're going to do in the next 6 months. That doesn't feature very highly in what boards want to hear about. So if you're putting your board report together for Q3, think very carefully about whether that is really something you want to focus on and highlight in your report. You may still want to put something in the appendix, but should that be a prominent part of your ERM update for your board. Second is prioritized ranking. Absolutely, that's a very important point. That was number 1 for what the board wanted. Risk mitigation plan. So there's alignment for number 2 and number 3, but that number 1 certainly doesn't feature as a topic the boards want to really get involved in. So think carefully about what topics you put in your report. And then secondly, as part of that thinking and preparation, here are questions that we know boards ask their ERM teams when they have reports presented, and they also should be asking management these questions as well, not just looking and turning to their ERM team when they're presenting it, but asking management these sorts of questions as well. I'm not going to read out everything that's on here, but you can see there are questions about ERM functionality, about risk appetite, risk relevance, interdependence, and mitigation. I'll just pull out a couple of them. Why aren't we concerned with the risks outlined in the newspapers? How do we reduce the possibility of significant risks not being identified? How do we know what we don't know, if you like? Or how do we know we don't know something, or some phrase similar to that? How does our ERM actually assist the achievement of our corporate objectives? How is our risk profile above our risk appetites? Are we taking too much risk? But also mindful that we want to avoid taking too little risk and being too cautious. So some great questions on here. So again, next time you're putting your board report together, think about these sorts of questions. These are the questions that top performing boards are asking about risk management. They're either asking their ERM team or they're asking senior management these sorts of questions. So let me turn again. Louis, let me turn to you first so I can at this point. What would you add to this list of questions, or are there other questions you would recommend that boards ought to be asking, and therefore the listeners to today's webinar, as they prepare their next ERM report, ought to be factoring into their update?
I think boards should be asking about the maturity of the risk process, and asking sort of how mature are we now, and where should we be going in the future? What's the improvement plan that we're focusing on to make sure we're improving the work in this area? Reputation also comes fairly high up the list of areas that the board will focus on. So what's the impact on our reputation? I know reputational risk is sort of seen as an area on its own now, and a lot of people sort of focus on reputational risk as more of a specialist subject, but I think most risks have their own reputational impact, and it's understanding how that's going to work, particularly in the context of protecting and developing a brand. Also linked into that is sort of what's our response plan if something was to go wrong? Have we actually got a robust and rapid response to things going wrong? Similar to when you think about business continuity planning, where you've got a clear plan of action and a clear chain of command. Have you got that sort of linked into other risks that could be fairly catastrophic for you? And also, I think, thinking about the performance of risk. Are we actually getting value out of risk management in the work that we're doing? And how are we measuring that? How are we making sure that we improve what we're doing from a risk perspective, and make sure that we're doing the right thing, and actually making sure what we say is what we do across all of the areas. And the final point, I think, linking into some of the points you've got on the page, where you've got ERM, I'm also seeing people think more laterally about the extended enterprise, and going back to what the IRM did a few years ago with the study on managing risk in a complex 21st century organisation. Are we actually mapping the bigger picture, or are we just sort of focusing on the internal factors? So you do need to make sure that you're thinking more externally and thinking about opportunity risk as well as threat. And some of these things, I think, are the key questions that board should be asking currently.
Okay, great, thank you. And Carolyn, same question to you. What do you think might be missing from this, or are there other themes that you would expect boards to be focused on?
Yeah, these are all great questions. I'm going to pass these along to my audit committee chairman. But I think that for me what could be additional here is the board asking how are we using ERM as we develop strategies. Too often when I see ERM practiced in companies, it's almost a form over substance conversation where we know we need to have risk management and we need to have dashboards and reporting to the audit committee or to the full board, and we need to know that has to be at least once a year, if not more frequently. But really, how is the management team using what could be really great input from a well-executed ERM program as they develop their plans to move forward? So for me, I think Louis touched on it, that the opportunity risk. How are we really using any of this to add value rather than to be a check the box for the auditors and regulators who expect us to be doing risk management? And I also think that question on how are our risks interrelated. There's been great studies done, including the CEB one, on risks tend to not operate in a vacuum, so one domino can set off a chain reaction. And how are we really stress testing these risks, which we tend to present to the management team and the board as one at a time. And so I think that idea of really thinking more at the next level of maturity, how do you test some of these interrelated risks and what's management's response to that rather than just discrete risks as we tend to hear in board meetings.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both for some good suggestions, some good additions to what we have on the list here. So some great additional ideas. Thanks for that. What I want to do now is having sort of kind of set the scene, if you like, with that listing requirements and the sort of regulatory requirements, talking about some of the areas that boards should be focused on and what they currently exercise the most and what generates the best conversations. Let's look at different reporting formats. There's a number of different ways in which you can report, you can provide an update on ERM and on risks to your board. I just want to highlight, I think I've got 7 different reporting formats here. These are not all alternates. You will probably want several of these in your board report, in your ERM update that's going to go to the board. So let me take you through and explain these different formats. So the first is a way of providing an overview of the top risks you face in an organisation. So it's a variation on a heat map. Many of you will be familiar with heat maps. We've got impact in this particular case on the vertical axis, going from low to high. We've got probability on the horizontal axis, going from low probability on the left to high probability on the right-hand side. But in addition, we're using colour and shapes to represent 2 other dimensions on here. The shape you can see in the bottom right is representing velocity. So if this risk occurred, how quickly would the impact be felt by the organisation? And then the colour is representing how effective our mitigation controls currently are. So we're trying to represent 4 dimensions here in one single graph. So it's a way of showing management a number of different dimensions or attributes of the principal risks, the top risks. And we haven't shown it on here. You'd probably need to number these risks and have a key to explain what each of the risks actually are, so you were clear which one was which. So that's one way of representing succinctly a number of different composite dimensions of your key risks. So probability, impact, effectiveness, and velocity. But typically management and board want to drill down to a level. I said one of their most popular is that deep dive. Well, here's an overview, one way of representing a specific risk, specific set of risks. Here we've just got 4 risks we're focusing on: financial, reputation, operational, and strategic. Again, we've got impact on the vertical axis, and we've got probability on the horizontal axis in a 5x5 matrix. But interesting what they've done on here is for that financial risk and the others, we have 3 different positions there. You can see there's a inherent risk, which is the IR. We have a residual risk, so obviously that's after you've taken account of the controls that you have in place, and then a target risk, which is actually where you want to be. And clearly you need to explain how you've moved from the inherent to the residual and what additional work or activity is going to be put in place to move from where the residual is to your target. So it's a way of representing a little bit more detail on individual risks here, and you can see there's a velocity sliding scale at the top of each of these four graphs as well. So again, we've got multiple dimensions being represented on the graph here, and the color coding familiar with red being in the top right hand corner. So again, multiple dimensions represented graphically, a little bit more detail on those four broad risk areas. Just going into more detail on a particular risk. This is a way of putting a scorecard together for an individual risk. So you'd need a page like this for each of your principal risks, maybe for your top 12, your top 15. You can see here, let me just navigate you around. You've got the same sort of colors in the middle there. So we've got here a current assessment. We've got a prior period, that might be prior month or prior quarter. So I've got a couple of questions coming in. People seem to be struggling to hear. But hopefully there's just a couple of people have raised that question. Hopefully everyone else can continue to hear. And then capacity, this is how much risk could we take. So this is related a little bit to what both Louis and Caroline were saying about opportunity risk. You know, are we being too cautious here? Have we got an appetite to take a little bit more risk in this particular area? The outlook there, so what do we expect this risk to, where do we expect this risk to be scoring in the next period, whether that's the next month or the next quarter. You've probably already looked around the rest of this page. You can see there's a risk owner. We've got a key risk indicator. So what is it, what metric is it we're monitoring to give us the health or the status of this particular risk? Is there a metric, or is there more than one metric? And things to think about there, is it a leading metric or is it a lagging metric? Is it looking backwards and telling us what that risk was, or is it, as it should ideally be, a leading metric giving us an indication of where this risk is trending in the future? On the left-hand side, statement of risk. This is more of an explanation about what the risk means to make sure everyone understands the same thing by this particular risk. Current mitigation efforts, I think that's self-explanatory. This is what we are currently doing to manage the risk to an acceptable level. On the right-hand side, what we're going to do in addition or differently if we need to change the current performance, the current status of that risk. Are we going to do more of something, or perhaps if we've over-managed it, what are we going to loosen up slightly? And then bottom right, key summary, key takeaway. So this is the key message that might be included in, extracted and included into an overall summary for this particular risk. So a lot of information on this page, and we see these being one risk per page, and this being populated for each of the principal risks in a pretty detailed risk report. The next area that many ERM teams have focused on and are reporting to both management and their ExCo as well as to their boards, key risk indicators. Here's an example of a key risk indicator. In this particular case, we can see in the middle of the page, quarter by quarter. No, actually, it's year by year, this particular one, but there's quarters in between the milestones that are signposted here, how this particular risk index, key risk indicator, has been tracking over time. And they've set bands. There's a red, yellow and green band, and you can see for a lot of the time this particular illustration of this KRI has been tracking in the yellow. And the advantage of showing it like this, you can see the trend, of course. You can see if it's trending upwards, trending downwards, how often it's gone into the red, how often it's gone into the green. And so by defining bands and reporting over a period of time, you get a good sense of volatility, you get a good sense of where it's normally tracking. Clearly for most risks you'd expect them to be in the green most of the time. This particular one, clearly as an illustration, we've shown it in the orange. And this is a composite risk, and you can see there are different elements at the bottom of the page which make up the particular index for this risk. So it's a way of representing, different to that previous page. Previous page was a point in time. This is showing the tracking of a key risk indicator over time. Another way of representing risks I think it was Caroline that mentioned this, it's very important for management to understand the reality of the situation, that most risks are not operating, don't occur in isolation. If one risk occurs, it's likely to raise the probability, raise the likelihood of another risk also occurring, kind of the domino effect, if you like. If one risk occurs, another risk may well also occur. So a way of representing that, which is a more realistic view of the world, is some sort of risk model, a risk network map, as we call it, on this particular page. This is an illustration, but it's showing for the dozen or so key risks that are identified on this page. Some of them are connected to each other, and the lines show that connection, and the thickness of the line shows the strength of the connection. And you can also, of course, put a direction on this so that which risk is going to cause another risk to materialize. So which way is the relationship, if you like. And the size of the circle represents a composite of probability and impact. And again, you could use color on this as well to bring into another dimension. But this is a way we've seen a small number of companies. This is a great concept, but it's actually hard to make this real in anything other than conceptual form. So we know we've worked with a couple of organisations that have made this real and put it into place, this network map. So a great way of more realistically showing the risk world that you're facing. And then the last couple I wanted to show, and then I'm going to bring Louis and Caroline back into the conversation. Emerging risks. I mentioned a little while ago that it's not only important to focus on the risks you're facing at the moment, but also to be able to scan the horizon, raise your eyes to the future, if you like, and look at the risks which might be emerging, which might be becoming more important for you. They may not be new risks, but they might be more likely to occur, or the impact of them might be more severe if they do crystallize. So looking to the future, and how do you represent those and report those back to your board? Well, here's one way. Here's one way of doing that. Again, we've represented a number of different dimensions, 4 different dimensions in this particular graph. Again, we've got probability and impact on the vertical and horizontal axis. The color is representing velocity, and the size of the bubble represents the overall score. So the combination of probability and impact as well. So it's a way of representing emerging risks in, again, a different sort of heat map. So it's not the current risks you're facing, it's those which are coming towards you, if I could put it that way. And really, using that phrase, coming towards you, here's another way of representing those emerging risks. And this meteor diagram, as we call it, is focused on high impact, high velocity risks. So we've put to one side the probability, but focused most on those high impact, high velocity risks. So if these did occur, they would have a very big impact, and we would feel that impact very quickly, hence the meteor analogy. So a way of representing very graphically to senior management those 2 particular dimensions of these emerging risks. So I've shown you 7 different ways of reporting risks to boards. Again, let me pause here, and Caroline, if I could start with you first. Other reporting formats, other different ways of getting the message across well, succinctly, clearly, with impact to boards. Have you seen any other formats or templates being used to do that well?
You know, I always think CEB does some of the more leading edge presentations and graphics, so especially this METEORS diagram that I've seen in the quarterly hotspots, risk hotspot communications that get sent out. So I thought that was really innovative. But typically, what I've seen is, a standard heat map, maybe with a trend line drawn, so you can see sort of things on the left-hand side of the trend are maybe less worrisome, things on the right-hand side, and of course the right-hand side of any 2x2 or 5x5 getting more attention. So it's really, I don't think we've progressed that far from red, yellow, green heat maps and standard matrices. So I think this meteor diagram is pretty interesting. It's what I've seen. Okay.
Let me just before I bring Louis back in, a question that's come in. Do you see different types of reports or formats being more useful for kind of a lower maturity organisation, someone that perhaps is starting out or at the early stages of their ERM journey? Would there be a simpler format that would be most impactful and useful for that type of organisation?
Great question. I do think that the simpler the graphics, the better, because the board is itself getting used to the communication and trying to be standard, so not trying to change your graphic interpretations every quarter. So sticking with something that works and is understandable, maybe not too many colors, not too much on velocity, so that they can start grasping the concept. And then moving, maybe towards the METEOR end of ERM depiction, because I think boards are used to seeing, especially the current board that I'm associated with at Virginia, is used to seeing things in a very text and tabular format, not a lot of graphics. So to throw something that requires a lot of explanation out there might set you back more than it helps the ERM effort. But over time, I think you can get more complex as the maturity and understanding of the board itself moves along.
Okay, great, thank you. And Louis, can I bring you in and ask that first question first around other effective reporting formats and templates that you've seen work well at different organisations that you've been involved with?
I think, as Carolyn said, this is a good array of examples of the sort of the types of things people should be focusing on. Two other things I've seen as well is a dashboard sort of view of pulling together a number of key aspects, similar to your scorecard. But you might have your sort of top 10 risks, your heat map, a summary of the sort of categories that are being picked up, details about controls and actions. So you pick up a number of themes on one or two pages. And the other thing that works quite well and links into the deep dive reviews that you referred to is to have all of the information on a particular risk on one page. So you've got all the background to the risk, you've got the scores, you've got the controls, you've got the actions, if there are any actions to follow up, and all the other sort of information that relates to that risk. And then you can go into a bit more detail to review that particular risk. And again, that links probably into your scorecard view.
Yeah.
I very much agree with Carolyn's view that you need to keep things fairly sort of simple and understandable, because I think it's very easy to have an array of information. I've seen some boards still receiving a copy of the risk register to sort of wade through and to understand. I think the key thing with the diagrams and the information that's presented in these sort of colourful views is also to link that into the narrative, to explain what is actually going on, to explain the trends that are coming through, and also to seek views, concerns, decisions from the board, because the board should be receiving this information, interpreting it, understanding what their perspective is on this area. And there should also be a two-way dialogue. It's very much understood that there's a lot of reporting that goes through to the board, and the board is receiving information. But quite often there's not information coming back the other way in the context of giving feedback and giving an interpretation of what's coming through, and that information doesn't always flow through. So I think it's important to do that. And I think somebody who's supporting the board needs to understand the culture of the board itself and to think about how the individuals on the board operate and what they're looking for. We ran a session recently called the Contemporary NED, thinking about the non-executive director person and their role going forward. And the question we posed is, do you need a digital NED on boards now, or do you need all of your board to be digital in the context of understanding sort of these key issues? Going back to what you were saying earlier on, Ian, with sort of cyber security, etc. Yeah. Things are moving more rapidly. The business model is changing. You need to be more agile in how you respond to things, look at things, particularly in the context of, as you've been pointing out, sort of velocity issues are very key as well. Things happen very quickly. Are you up to speed with dealing with that side of things? And the final point I think I'd make is to do all this, you do need to have some degree of technology. Everybody starts with a spreadsheet or a Word document to tabulate and keep a record, but it's very list and flat in terms of what you're getting. It's list driven, so you've got a list of things that you're looking at. if you can start to develop these relationships and interlink things around the structures of the organisation, the people in the organisation, the objectives of the organisation, the categories and different types of risk, then you can start to slice and dice the information and get more from it and understand what's happening and why it's happening. And risk should be dynamic and should be reviewed as a changing activity. And I think having good information like you presented helps you to understand these things and helps you to ask sort of those questions. Okay,
great, thank you. And just finally coming back to that extra question around any recommendations for, if you like, a simplified format for those organisations who might be at the earlier stages of introducing ERM?
It's probably picking out those principal sort of headline risks and
right.
what are the top things that we're looking at as a board, and putting those perhaps into a simple sort of heat map, before control, after control sort of perspective, just to see how things are moving, and then to perhaps have some narrative to explain sort of what's going on and to think about any, as you said, sort of any emerging areas and any areas that you need to keep a track of. I think is the key thing.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to move us on then. Thanks very much for those comments. I want to focus with the last 10, 15 minutes or so that we have in this afternoon's webinar on a very topical risk issue, on the issue of Brexit. Now, clearly the vote was a couple of months ago, but we're in a new quarter now, and certainly most of the organisations we're working with, whether it's on the audit side of the house or the ERM side of the house, are telling us that their board is expecting an update on Brexit at the next time they meet in their Q3 board meeting. So every board is expecting that. So if you're focused on providing an update to your board sometime in Q3, you should definitely have Brexit as part of that update. Now, from the conversations we're having, boards are, they understand that there's a level of precision which is unreasonable to ask for, but so they're not looking for the definitive, precise answer. But what they certainly do want to get a feel for is the sort of size and scope of Brexit for their organisation. Where's Brexit going to have most impact for us? Which areas of the uncertainty that's being talked about in the press are going to be most significant for us, and how well are we currently set up to manage, whether it's workforce volatility, currency volatility, regulatory change, whatever it might be. Which of those are most significant for us? Which of those do we need to do more work on, both to understand and to address them? So CB, we've recognised that, we've heard that, and we've built three tools to help our clients address that very tough challenge. They're laid out here. I'm just going to take you briefly through a little bit of the detail behind each of these. So on the left-hand side, we've built a workbook to help you build that communication, that scale and size. Get your arms around Brexit for your organisation. Secondly, we have a team reviewing, monitoring, and listening to every update that's being done from North America and EMEA by a listed company, whether they publish a report or they have an analyst call. We're getting transcripts, we're reading those reports, and we're seeing what they actually say about Brexit, and we're summarising that on a week-by-week basis. And you can also read the detail. We actually include the detail as well as a great executive summary on that. And on the right-hand side, we've built a ready-to-use presentation material around Brexit, which has got some great background. It's got some great synopsis of forecasts from a wide variety of different companies. It's got some great questions for asking of finance, of HR, of communications, and of operations as well. I'm just going to take you through each of those. These are all ready to use right now. So first of all, that workbook this is designed to give you a tool, a template, a mechanism to get a good early sense of the size and scale of the Brexit challenge for your organisation. We've identified 8 dimensions that Brexit's going to impact every organisation, and 21 metrics to give you a way of measuring the potential impact across those 8 dimensions. So these are those 8 dimensions. So you will be affected by Brexit on all of these to a greater or lesser extent. So talent, market, trade, capital, supply chain, data, regulation, and strategy. So at the first part of the workbook, just having a sense of which of those are likely to be high, medium, or low for you. And then for each of those, we have a little more detail on each of them. You can see here for talent, market, and trade, we've identified 1 metric for talent, 2 for market, and 3 for trade. Ways of identifying, yes, market is important for us, or trade is important for us. How can we best measure the potential impact of the volatility or uncertainty or potential change that's coming as a result of Brexit? And some questions, suggested questions on the right-hand side. Now, we think these are pretty good metrics. It might be that in some organisations you might want to nuance these and finesse them slightly, but if this is not the definitive metric for you, it's a fantastic starting point. And so we've got these for each of those 8 dimensions. I'm just showing 3 of them on this particular page. The way the book is then organised, the workbook is then organised, you then can populate. Oh, why is that not moved? Let me try that again. There's a summary page again for each of those risks, and that's in an illustrative way just populated here. So describing the risk, your current preparation, additional activity you want to do, and what's our target. Once we've done that mitigation, how will we know we've achieved a level that we're comfortable with? So that's just a very quick look through that workbook. In addition to that, as I mentioned, we have a team producing a weekly update on investor disclosures, whether these are quarterly, half-year, annual reports, or other analyst or investor updates that are being provided by listed companies in North America and in EMEA. We are reviewing those and summarising them, and our members are getting an update every week. So you can see what other people are saying broadly in the summary or in detail, company by company, what questions are being asked by analysts and what answers are being provided, where companies are providing already additional information in their market updates. And then finally, to help our clients, help our members build their Q3 update, we've already built a 50-page PowerPoint slide, so you can cut and paste different pages. So what does Brexit mean? How many trade deals are going to have to be negotiated? What might be the different options? The member of the EEA, a Norway type model, a Swiss type model, or whatever it might be. Different forecasts from different consulting and research firms. Impact upon different sectors, we've analysed those, and then we have a series of great questions for your legal team, your HR team, operations and finance to focus on as well. So some great questions, some great material, all ready to be used to plug into your Q3 update that you're likely to be working on over the next few weeks. So let me pause there, and Caroline, let me turn to you. I know being based in America, Brexit may not have quite the same profile that it does for us based over on this side of the water, but from the university, from your ACL board perspective, what are the boards that you're working with? What are they focusing on in terms of Brexit? What are their concerns and focus areas at the moment?
Sure. Well, I remember when the shock of Brexit first occurred, CEB had put out a questionnaire, and I had a one-on-one with President Sullivan, who leads the university, and I printed the list out, and we had a great conversation about, does Brexit pose any risk for the university? And it was a really great opportunity to think through anything to do with currency. What about students that are paying in pounds and the effect of devaluation, which was pretty steep at that point, on their ability to pay tuition. I mean, it really gave us a flavor for having a conversation about students that are either internationally based or traveling internationally and thinking through what could be risks that they would face. So it was a really great occasion, even though, as you say, at the moment we're not faced with a Brexit risk, though perhaps it's a foreshadowing of things to come on a different scale. Given our political dialogue. But, and for ACL, Ian and I had talked a little bit before the call about ACL is a growing company that the advisory board is really focused on high-level strategy and measuring the success of a company who's had just decades of success as an analytical tool and now is growing into a GRC software solution tool that serves beyond the internal audit population. So our conversations have been more about customer engagement with our our gear, as they call it. But when we do have our October board meeting, it's a question that I'm going to ask: how do we look at potential M&A or other deals in Europe, given where Brexit is moving, if we have more information by that time?
Okay, great, thank you. And Louis, from your perspective, what are you seeing boards focusing on, and where are they showing most concern, if you like, as a result of the Brexit? What help do they need from their ERM teams?
I think it's been very much sort of early days with the vote sort of coming in June, and then sort of the summer sort of period coming very rapidly after that. I think it's probably a bit of a lull in just understanding, what the issues are. And it's interesting, looking at what you're saying here, whether organisations should be producing their own sort of Brexit risk register, sort of a subset of their own main sort of risk register. I think the key thing is that it should be handled by the risk management framework. And whilst it obviously needs to have special attention, it's probably going to have some big impacts on strategy and direction of the organisation. It could have an impact on the business model and the operations, depending on your markets and what you're doing. So I think what we're seeing and what we're promoting is really you just need to sit down and analyse the situation and understand what it means for you in a bit more detail. Are there any plans that you need to put in place to move things forward and to create a dialogue with your stakeholders, etc.? Do you then need to test things through scenario analysis? So this is where it sort of does actually link in fairly closely with sort of good risk management processes of looking at different aspects of the issue. And then the final thing is, do we actually need to think about how we might influence things? Because at the end of the day, we're in this sort of honeymoon period where it's not very clear what is actually going to happen. Because from the political perspective, things need to be ratified and formally agreed to move forward. And at the moment, I think they're being discussed. And could there be a fudging exercise as opposed to a complete sort of exit? So again, I think there's a lot of uncertainty as to what's happening. And when you look at certain aspects, like excuse me, the sector that you're in could have a big impact. So if you're in the financial services sector, it's a very big issue for you at the moment, and you need to understand how you're going to deal with it. But if you're in other sectors, it's probably got less of an impact. And then when you look at things like around sort of legal structures, people, rules and regulations, again, they're fairly well in place. It's probably thinking around how we employ people, who we employ, very much picking up on what you've outlined in your sort of talent sort of view and that sort of perspective. So there are different nuances and different themes which in themselves may not be new themes, but they're given special focus because of this bigger sort of issue which we now have to deal with as a potential event. So it's interesting just seeing how different organisations are facing the topic. And I think some people are very much sort of following your lead in sort of getting a lot more detail and understanding. Others are sort of stepping back and sitting back and just saying, well, let's just see how things pan out. So it's whether you're expanding, whether you're contracting, or whether you're deferring in sort of decision-making processes. And as a board, you obviously need to be on the front foot rather than on the back foot. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And that's exactly what we're hearing from the majority of the organisations we work with. That the board wants to understand Brexit as well as it can, given that there is definitely some quite a lot of uncertainty around at the moment. But and that was the rationale behind putting those 8 dimensions in the workbook and putting some metrics, 21 metrics, to try and evaluate in your own organisation how you're currently positioned and how you're exposed to volatility or uncertainty there. But let's move on. We've got a couple of minutes left. I mentioned right up front. So Louis is running a course in, when is this? It's in two and a half weeks' time or so, on this similar subject. So if you want more information, you want to go into more detail around risk in the boardroom, do sign up for that course. You can see all the details are there. There's actually a link there on the page, as well as the IRM email address and phone number there. That really brings us towards the end. I think we have one polling question for you to get your feedback on this afternoon's session. We've got 1 minute to go, so I need to click on here. There we go. So let me do that. So I've got, you should see one question in front of you now, and I'll also put a second question. Okay. And then I'm going to put a second question out, and then we will leave that open for 15-20 seconds, give everybody a chance who wants to vote. Fantastic. And then, just very finally, before I close, if you do want more information, do get in touch. There's more information here about CB, our risk management support and activity on the last couple of pages. We're up at time. It is 4 o'clock. I said we would start on time and we would finish on time, so we will do exactly that. Thank you, everybody, for joining the call today. Thank you, Carolyn, for dialing in from the US. Thank you, Louis, for dialing in from the UK and providing some great additional insights from both of you during the webinar. So thanks, everybody, for joining. Look forward to the next time. So thank you and good afternoon.